Welcome back. It's kind of funny. I laughed after I did the last video. I was telling you how we were going to do real PHP, and then I looked at my code here, and literally every bit of it was HTML. But now we are going to write some real PHP. So up here in this block, we have our form, and we have our search form, and it's putting stuff in the search bar. And so what we're going to do is we're going to write an if statement. And so what we want to know is if not, and we haven't really talked about this very much, but the exclamation point before something means not. And then I want to say empty, and we're going to say, let me get that there. We're going to say get, okay? And get is a fancy variable that PHP has to basically refer to what's up here in the URL bar. So what we're going to do is we're going to, if there's nothing in the URL bar, this bit of code is not going to do anything. In fact, let's, this is kind of an array. This is an array, so we're going to do search. So if not empty, get search, which means that if there's nothing in the search thing up here, then ignore it. If there is something, so if it's not empty, which means full, then we're going to run this bit of code. And so what we're going to do is we are going to assign get search to a variable. Now, one of the things you have to be concerned with is security. You have to assume that your users are either malicious or idiots. If you are designing code, you have to basically think about what's the worst thing that my student could do. And so the worst thing in this situation, if somebody had the permissions, now the page would be killed if they didn't have permission to visit this page, but you could come in here and put malicious stuff here and try to get that information into the database. So we want to prevent that. And the way that we prevent that is by doing what they call sanitize the data. And we'll give some examples of that later on in the course. But for now, what you want to know is that when I want to do that search term, I'm going to do search, I'm going to be real obvious with it, search term equals input get search. And I'm going to explain this in a second. So what I've done is I've said that I've taken a variable called search term, and I've said that I want to get it. And so this could be coming from one of two places. It could be coming from the URL bar search, or it could be coming from a regular form if I had done post instead of get. We'll get into that more later. But basically what it does is it takes whatever's in here and does what they call sanitizes it, which means that if there's some weird characters where somebody's trying to get some bad information into your database, for the most part, this is going to take care of that. So we have this variable, and so if I were to come in here, it might come off the screen a little bit, but if I dump search term, let's see what happens. So you can see here that it took the FDS, whatever, from the bar and assigned it to that variable. So if I come in here and type PHP rocks like that, and then submit it, then PHP rocks shows up in here. So basically whatever that is, I am assigning it to a variable. So now this is where the real PHP comes in. So what we want to do, and you're going to learn SQL on the fly if you don't know it already. So we have this database, and we are in the table called students, which is where we're storing this. So what we're going to do is we are going to write a query, okay? And so I'm just going to call it query for now to help you know what it is. And I'm going to say DB. Now DB, if you remember when you installed UserSpice, you gave it the username and password to your database, which was root and no password. And so it has this constant connection to your database. And so we're going to say DB query. If you're not familiar with the term query, query means to ask a question basically. So we're going to say, hey database, I would like you to select, which means grab, star, which means everything, from students, okay? So at this point, if we were to just end it right here, this thing would go in there and grab everything from the students table. In fact, and yeah, well, I'm not going to demonstrate it, but it would get everything from the students table. But what if we want to narrow it down to where fname is equal to the search term, or lname is equal to the search term, or RFID is equal to the search term? What we're going to do is we're going to write where fname equals question mark. And the reason we're doing the question mark is that's a security thing. So just assume that for now, and we'll get back to that later. Or lname equals question mark, or RFID equals question mark. So let's talk about what we're doing here. So we're going to be replacing that question mark with the search term. So we're saying go to the database and give me everything where the first name matches the search term, the second name matches the search term, or the RFID tag matches the search term. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to make an array. So at the end of this, we're going to put a comma and we're going to make an array. And so these things could be any variables that we want. In this case, it just happens to be that we're using the same variable for all three of those things. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to do search term, comma, search term, comma, search term. So what we've done is we've said go to the database and find anything where the first name equals search term, or the last name equals search term, or the RFID equals search term. So doing that right now is not actually going to do anything to the page. If I were to come in here and refresh the page, nothing happened. Even if I put a search term in there, nothing happened, because all we're doing is telling it to get the results. We're not having it given back to us. So there's two things I want to do at this point. The first thing I want to do is I want to do a count. I want to know how many things matched that count. So I'm going to do count equals, and then remember in our lesson about objects, I showed you how you can use the little arrow to get a property of something. So we're going to do query count. And again, this is one of those things you just have to remember right now. So what we're saying is go there, find the stuff from the database, and then here, tell me how many rows you got back. So how many results? If I were to come in here to the database and I search for Dan, I would get 1. If I searched for Jim, I would get 0, because none of these things have Jim in them. If I were to search for Hoover, I would get 2, because this row and this row. And so we want to know how many search results did we get. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say results equals, and we'll do some more complicated things with this later, but we're going to do query, and then the same thing with the arrow, and we're going to do results. And we're putting these little function parentheses after there because this is a function, and we'll get into that more later. So again, if I refresh the page at this point, nothing is going to happen, because all we've done is say find this. We haven't said do anything with it. So let's do this. Let's come down here and let's make a div down at the bottom, and we're going to say div class equals row, and so we're going to make a full row. And then we're going to do this thing, except we're going to make it the full width. Let's take this here. We're going to take this and we're going to make a full width thing down here. And so we basically, and then I'm just going to put this is the bottom. Okay. So if you see when I search that, I have this is the bottom. Now, this is where we're going to get into some more PHP stuff. We are going to make this only show up if they did a search. Okay, so you ready for this? We're going to open up PHP tags and we're going to copy this and say the only way that we want this whole section of PHP to show up is if the search is not empty. Now we have to grab this other one from the bottom, that we have this other brace so that they match, and we're going to open up another set of PHP tags and we're going to do this. And so you can see here, and I'm leaving these on. I know they're annoying, but I'm leaving this on to show you this easier on the screen. We're saying that if there is a search term entered into URL bar, then show this bottom section. Otherwise, don't show it. So if I were to save this and refresh the page, it's there now. But if I delete the search term and hit enter, it's not there. So I'm going to show you that again. There's nothing at the bottom, and then I search this in there, and now it's there. This is at the bottom. Okay, and then, so what we can do is a few more tricks. And this video is going to go a little longer, but what we're going to do is we're going to say, instead, we're going to do an H2 tag here and say we found, and then we're going to leave some space there, student, S-T-U-D-E-N-T, and then I'm just going to put parentheses S there. So if we come in here and say we found students, maybe we'll put an extra break here. Okay, we found students, but we don't know the number, but we do have this echo thing. Now, up until this point, we have been writing PHP echo. There's a quicker way to do that. You can actually do this symbol, the less than and question mark, the equal, and then we're going to grab this variable from up here, and we're going to tell it to echo the count, okay? And when we refresh the page, we can come up here and see we found 0 students. So now this is getting a little bit more dynamic. Now this is getting a little bit more interesting. And so to make things easier here, we're not going to build a whole table right now, but we're going to do dump results. RESULTS, and then we're going to close our PHP tags. So what we're saying is if they search for something, tell us how many of them they got and just dump out the results here. So if I were to come in here and type in Hoover and search, we found 2 students. We found Dan Hoover, we found Kim Hoover. And so all of a sudden things are starting to get a lot more dynamic and a lot more powerful.